This story begins when Uncle Jay was getting ready to embark on an upcoming expedition to the mid-Atlantic ridge. The research vessel they would be traveling on was a medium-sized vessel, around 80 meters long. One of those ships that has a crane, and it was crewed by maybe 20 men. And there was about 15 marine biologists of various specialties attending. It was early summertime in the late 90s. I'm unsure of the exact date, and Uncle Jay was about 30 at the time. He said they couldn't have had a better day for loading the vessel. The ocean was calm and weather was beautiful. They would be out at sea for the next month and a half. All weather forecasts looking promising. Once the ship was loaded, they embarked on their journey. It took them approximately a week to reach the ridge. The primary goal of this expedition was examine and possibly identify new species of sea life in that region. Additionally, they wanted to examine how known species lived. They didn't have any submarines, so in order to find any new species, they had an intriguing plan. Using the crane on board the ship, they attached cow carcasses to the hook and lowered them into the water near the ocean floor. A few feet away from the hook was multiple cameras and lights to observe any sea life that might devour the carcass. Uncle Jay said they had about 10 carcasses. They would begin their journey in the northern portion, lower the carcasses into the water for a few days, and move south along the ridge, repeating this process. When the carcasses were lowered in, the ship would power down all engines and simply drift. If they drifted away from the ridge, they would power up, very slowly move back into position. Because this was a rather low-budget mission, the cameras on the hook didn't provide a live feed, and all footage was thoroughly examined after. That was about 48 hours of footage they had to sift through after each time they pulled the hook back up. They had been at this for about a week and had not made any new discoveries, but did gain valuable footage of rarely seen sea life consuming the cows. At this point in the story, Uncle Jay said everything was going according to plan. The seas were calm and everyone on board was enjoying their time. They were onto their 5th cow carcass. It was about 5 p.m. and they hooked it up and lowered it into the water. This portion of the ridge they were at was about 3,500 meters deep and was pushing the limit of how much cable they had on the crane. Now, for this mission, 2 of the marine biologists were required to monitor the crane and their location in relation to the ridge all times. My uncle and another biologist drew the short straw and had to watch overnight. They would swap out around 9 a.m. Uncle Jay said it was an uneventful night. Him and the other biologist chatted all night and bounced different theories off each other. Around 7 a.m., just as the sun was rising, all was calm. Almost too calm, Jay remarked. They hadn't drifted off course throughout the night. The ocean was like glass. Much of the crew was beginning to rise as well. But what happens next is a complete shock to everyone on board. It's important to note that the crane had been angled off the right side of the ship. All of a sudden and very rapidly, the 80-meter-long vessel began listing to the right side. It was almost as if something grabbed the hook and began pulling it deeper. My uncle said the immediate panic he felt was unlike anything he experienced. He said it felt like the ship was going to capsize. They immediately sounded the ship's onboard alarm system to notify the crew of an emergency. Once they had their faculties in order after the initial shock, my uncle ordered the other biologist to begin reeling in the crane. Since the cabling was so long, it would take about 20 minutes to completely reel in the line. The other biologist began to reel in the crane, but the winch was struggling and the ship was leaning more and more into the water. My uncle said that just as water began to pour over the right side of the ship, it smacked back down to an upright position. He was sent flying into some containers. Many of the crew had begun to come out now as well. There was several injured on board, but nothing was life-threatening. Over the next 20 minutes, as the crane was still retracting the line, the crew asked their injured and any damages to the ship. My uncle was ultimately uninjured despite being thrown around. He said waiting for the line to come up was the longest 20 minutes of his life. Everyone was in complete shock as to what just happened. 2 minutes of complete chaos, and now all was calm again. When the crane returned to the surface, the cow carcass was completely gone, and the large metal hook was slightly bent. A few of the cameras were missing, but thankfully not all. The cow carcass being completely gone was the most interesting part, as in every other case, it was never gone completely. The vessel's captain made the decision to head back shortly after this incident, much to the disappointment of the biologists, including my uncle. He wanted to find out what could have caused this. However, several onboard generators were damaged in the impact, and they were essential to the ship's operation, so they had to return. My uncle believed it was because the CPT and ship's crew were terrified, and rightfully so. On the week-long journey back, the biologists examined over the footage to try identify what caused this. The footage by all accounts was normal. There was the carcass about 10 meters off the sea floor, illuminated by the floodlights. Some small shrimp, like sea life, was feasting on the cow, when all of a sudden the cameras went black. Not as in they stopped recording, but something was covering them. The timestamps showed it was the correct time of the incident. After 2 minutes, the lights came back on and they could see again. It wasn't much though, as in an enormous amount of sediment was kicked up from the ocean floor and now enveloped the view of the cameras. While they were able to rule out the hook getting snagged on the bottom, they were never able to see what caused this. They returned to port and reported their findings, but to my knowledge, nothing ever came of it. My uncle has his theories for what could have caused this, ranging from a hungry sperm whale to giant squid, to some unknown massive sea creature. Whatever it was must have been huge in order to devour a complete cow carcass in under 2 minutes and nearly capsize an 80-meter research vessel. When I was a child, my family and I lived in a haunted house on the outskirts of town. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. One night, I was in the living room watching TV with my dad, and I got up to use the bathroom and saw the ghostly figure of a little boy standing at the end of the hallway. He looked sad, but also as if he were trying to communicate something to me. Suddenly, he gestured for me to follow him into the bathroom. I wasn't sure if I should go, but I felt drawn to the boy. So I followed him down the hallway and into the bathroom. Once I was inside, I no longer saw him. I felt an eerie feeling wash over me. Something compelled me to look into the bathtub. And as I pulled back the shower curtain, I saw the little boy lying in the tub, his eyes and mouth wide open as if he were struggling to breathe. I was terrified and ran back down the hall to my dad. As I sat on his lap and tried to explain what I had just seen, he looked at me with a look of shock and concern. He then revealed to me that the previous owner of the house had committed a gruesome murder. The man had killed his entire family, burying his wife's body inside one of the bedroom walls, and drowning his son in the very same bathtub I had just seen the little boy in. It all made sense now. The little boy's ghost had been trying to communicate the tragic events that had occurred in the house before we moved in. It was a haunting experience that stuck with me for years, and I never felt completely comfortable in that house again. Eventually, my family decided to move out of the house, and it has remained vacant ever since. The ghostly apparitions and eerie feelings that haunted our time there are a reminder that sometimes the past can come back to haunt us in ways we never could have imagined. This happened back when I was in college. It was back before there was cell phones, or the internet. My college was located up in the mountains with only a small town situated beside the main campus. While it was a very good technical school, the curriculum was very demanding, so there was a high dropout rate. Therefore, the partying could be quite intense to release some of the pressure. There was one fraternity I knew a lot of the brothers since we had attended the same high school. To be honest, I didn't like any of them. It always felt to me like fraternities were a place to buy your friends and be popular. This particular frat liked to throw a big party in their basement every Saturday night during the winter season. Some of my real friends enjoyed these parties, so I'd take them, kind of acting like an escort. It is important to note this frat had a reputation for acting like militant fascists at times, so you had to be careful how you handled them when things got tense. Of course, I knew many of them, so it was a bit easier for me at the time. I remember one particular Saturday evening, a nice-looking girl came up and asked me for a light. She wanted to smoke a cigarette. I obliged her, and she stood there by the bar smoking openly in front of everyone. Sometime a little later, after she had finished her smoke, some dude came up to the bar and lit up a smoke. Immediately, a bunch of frat brothers surrounded him, asking if he had asked permission. He put out his cigarette and apologized, but I could see the frat brothers still weren't happy and started to shove him. "Hey," I shouted out. "That girl just had a smoke and nobody said a thing." One of the frat brothers, who was an upper-class man, turned around to see who was challenging them. He stood there for a moment and gave me a cryptic look. He then turned back and told the dude to go outside if he wanted to smoke. This evening there was a large tub full of grain alcohol with purple Kool-Aid mixed in to cut it. A huge chunk of frozen ice floated in the middle. People at the party were getting totally smashed drinking that awful mess. Another frat brother I knew from high school came up with a paper cup full of the punch. I took a sip and grimaced. It felt like there was some soft hair in my mouth. I spit it out and stuck a finger in my mouth, fishing a small tuft of soft fur. I could feel my anger begin to rise as I pushed through the crowd to get at the tub. The chunk of ice had melted quite a bit now, and then I saw it. There in what was left of the ice was a frozen kitten. "What the hell?" I shouted as my anger continued to grow. A pledge was standing beside me and said, "Cool, huh?" as he laughed. I could not help myself as I made a hard fist and punched him in the face as hard as I could. At that point, I blacked out from the rage. When I came to again, I was standing out in the yard. There were cops everywhere. It's no secret the local police there don't like any of the fraternities. I watched in silence as cops were placing some of the handcuffed frat boys in the back of their squad cars. There was an older police officer standing beside me, and he told me to leave, which I immediately did. Later in the month, the fraternity lost their charter. Sometimes I'd see some of the ex-frat members at other parties. They liked to give me mean looks, and one named Roger once started to trash talk. But as soon as I approached them, they left. The air hung heavy with the oppressive heat of a summer afternoon. My brother's energetic daughter, Lily, bounced at my feet, begging, "Uncle Larry, hide and seek, please." The old house with its labyrinthine hallways and dusty corners seemed to relish the game. Shadows stretched long in the fading light as we played round after round. Lily squealed with delight, her hiding spots growing ever more inventive. Then, my turn to seek arrived. 30 agonizing seconds ticked by as I recited the rhyme, my voice echoing eerily in the darkening house. As soon as I declared, "Ready or not, here I come," a cold dread gripped me. Each search came up empty, the silence growing more suffocating with each room I checked. Fear began to curdle in my stomach. The backyard was my final hope. The porch light cast a weak, flickering glow on the rickety storage shed. Dread gnawed at me as I remembered the unsettling stories whispered about the shed. Stories of forgotten belongings and strange occurrences. Still, it was the last place to search. The rusty hinges groaned as I pushed the door open. A stale, suffocating air hit me, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The weak light barely reached the back, leaving the corner shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. But there, in the doorway, a single detail screamed at me from the gloom. A lone rocking chair sat empty, swaying gently back and forth, as if propelled by an unseen hand. The rhythm was slow, methodical, unnervingly lullaby-like. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Lily, brother. My voice came out as a choked whisper. The rocking chair creaked to a stop. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. A primal terror clawed at my throat. I didn't wait another second. I scrambled back out, slamming the creaking shed door behind me with a resounding bang. The rocking chair resumed its eerie swaying, the sound echoing through the silent yard. Bursting back inside, I found Lily, not in the shed, but huddled in the living room closet, whimpering. My brother held her close, his face pale. Relief flooded me, momentarily washing away the terror. "There you are," I exclaimed, forcing a smile. But before I could question Lily, my brother's voice cut me off. It was a low, trembling whisper. "We weren't playing hide and seek anymore, Larry." The playful afternoon was over. An oppressive weight settled over the house, as if something unseen had brushed past, leaving behind a chilling reminder. The rocking chair continued its slow, relentless sway, a constant vigil over the dark secret of the old shed. The game of hide and seek remained unfinished, a chilling testament to the things that lurk in the shadows, unseen but ever present.